Okay.
So the first thing I mentioned after I opened my code editor was to show us this deployment of the to-do API that we developed with Django REST framework, and I gave a shout out to Kofi. So Kofi was the one that provided this endpoint. He has deployed his own to-do application, and I clicked on it to show us that it works. So currently we have 5 to-dos which he has deployed. So thank you, Kofi. We are going to be using your to-do API to in this in the class today.
It's a pleasure.
So then I went over to start the React application that we are using in the last class. So my React app was to do, then npm run start. Sorry, npm run start to start the React server. So it's starting. Then I also give like a recap of what we covered in the last class. In the last class we covered, the concept of React componentization, one-way data flow, props, states. We didn't touch much on states, but we are going to be doing that today. And then the folders. We went through the folders, the node modules, the public, the content of each of these folders. And then we established that the styling or the CSS remain the same, still the same CSS. The difference is just that instead of class in HTML, we have class name here. And also we discussed, and of course, styling as well as a different syntax. In normal HTML and CSS, we just style them using strings, but here we style with objects, JavaScript objects, where the key will be the property, and then the value will be the value of the property you want to of the CSS you want to use. Then we also established that you can write some JavaScript expressions in React, and that's where the concept of JSX comes, because there is a JavaScript function and you're writing HTML. Within those HTML, you can make some values to be dynamic, and I think we have an example of that in the to-do item, where we are passing a dynamic to-do list from the props, which is a value that is coming from the to-do list component right here. And then we also discussed about this is the props. So these are the props work. You pass in the props from the top level component, and then you access it in the tree or the lower level components as props, and then you can grab the item you want to grab. And then I think I also mentioned that this way of defining functions to write components is what we call functional components in React. That we also have a class component in React. For example, this to-do item can be written as a class component, which is the initial way React was started. It's just of recent that we have functional components. So it's possible that you check your code base and then you find that it's written in purely class components. So I use functional components a lot, but let me see if I can write this to-do item as a class component. So when you want to write a class component, it's more like object-oriented programming, you extend, you say class to do item. So this can be anything. This can be the name you want to give your component. Then you say extends react.component. So this class is the name of the component. It's extending this class, which is also from React. You can currently import this component directly from React. So when you import it directly, you don't need to use react.component. Just call the component directly. And then you have to initialize your class. So this is like init in Python when you define a function, and then you return, you render, I think you render, and then when you render, you return, I'm not exactly sure now, but let's see. So when you render, you return a when you render, you return a GSX, which can be any. So let me just remove this since we are not even dealing with states anyways. So you can see how it looks like. The simplest way you can have a class component. The class component we extend from this component class, which is this one, that you also import from React. Then you render, and in that render you return what you want to return. So it might look a bit complex anyways, but it's still the same thing. So let me just copy what we have here and paste it here. So let's comment this out. So because this has a props, we need to get the props from. So this is how you have access. This is how you access props in the class components. So this way you can be able to get your values that is passed to this item. Although it's very tricky, but it's still more like the same. It's still the same concept. You return this thing. So this super is, like I said, it's like init, but I think this super is something that comes under constructor. So I think that's something that we are missing here. So I think that's what I missed here. So there's all class as constructor. So this constructor is like the init, and it's in this constructor we now call this super. So I rarely use class components, but this was what I started with anyways. So this constructor will be the one that will get the props. So then, class, for class, you have to use a lot of, so there's this thing you use in class. If you want to access, say this props, for example, you have to use something we call this dot props. So this is more like the way we use self in Python when you want to access a class variable, a class method, or a class property. You use self in Python, but here in JavaScript, you use this, saying I want to grab something from this object, from this class. So this one that we're having props dot to do, like a function in the functional component. Here we have to do this dot props dot to do. You get? So it's a very tricky way of writing React, but it's very powerful actually. It's very, very powerful. It's very powerful. So here we can also define states, but I don't think I want us to go through the class route. I'm just trying to show us that what you wrote here in like a few lines of code, this is how it looks like when you're using the class method. And of course, if you go back to the to-do application, you still see the to-do items. Nothing will change. It's just that this is how you write it in class. So I actually mix this up, this constructor. You can see I was writing super earlier, but it's actually constructor. So this is like OOP of JavaScript. You use constructor, just like the way we have init in OOP of Python. And then we use this, while in OOP of Python we use self. So sometimes it can be very, very confusing, but it's still the same concept. Okay, so instead of boring us with this class method, let me just comment this out and then comment on turn on our functional components, and then we can remove this since we are not using it again. Because with these functional components, we can write our code very fast and it's very clean and neat. So yeah, so today let's fetch our to-do and make it dynamic instead of using. So I think our to-do is coming from this app.js. I think we have a list. Yeah, we have a list of to-do here. So instead of making it, hard coded, let's make it dynamic. So let me remove this. So in React, we have what we call lifecycle methods. So that would have been beautiful to demonstrate with a class component, but we can still do it with functional components, actually. But let me just show you where that is in React documentation. So the React documentation is your go-to when you want to, when you want to understand something deeper. So you go to the documentation. Okay, the constructor is even here. You can see it. You go to documentation, then you go to the docs. Then we have we have a lot of sections here, but the one we want to talk about is this states and life cycle. So React has a lot of life cycle, but what I would like us to understand is the concept is more like the way, the process or the steps that React follow before your code appears on the screen. So think of it that way. So you do a lot of things in your code, but before your code is rendered on the screen, before you see these to-do items, what are the things that the React port or the React DOM API does before your code is rendered on the screen? So there are a lot of things that happens under the hood, a lot of them. But just understand that something happens before your component is rendered. Something happens and when your component is rendering, and something happens after your component is rendered. So I think this is the top level app. This is the app. So let me reload this. We shouldn't see any to-do item because I think I've removed the right. Yeah, I cannot see anything. But why is that happening? Let me just comment this out. So again, like I discussed this last week, the way we comment right here is different from the normal way we comment in. So this is where we comment. Okay, yeah, this is what I want to see. So we don't have anything to do list here. But I want to see if I can demonstrate the life cycle of a React component. What happens when a component is rendering and after a component is rendered. So this search box is a component. Let me go to this search box. So this is a search box component. So let me open the console so we can print something on the console to see how it works. So let me just try console.log. This is the search box component. And then let me reload. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4. I only logged this once, but you can see that it's appearing 4 times in the console, and that's a lot of rendering that is happening because each of these components are rendered on the screen for you to see. So a lot of rendering is happening here, and that means something is causing that to happen, right? And let me try something. Let me reload that. Is there a typo here? So there's a typo here actually. I should be placed so that. So that's another beautiful thing about Create React app. You see a lot of suggestions when you have a typo. So when this component is rendered, this is printed on the console, which is this one. Of course, it's printed twice, which we're also going to look into very soon. And after it is rendered, this is printed on the console, which is this. So don't worry about this yet. We are still going to discuss it. But what I want you to understand is that React gives you what we call lifecycle methods or lifecycle API that you can use to know when your component is rendered, before it is rendered, while it is rendering, and even after it is rendered. You can even know if it's going to be rendered or if it's not going to be rendered. There are a lot of them, but of course we can't cover everything. But the one that we're going to use a lot is this use effect hook. So because we are using functional API, we are going to be talking about hooks. So there are a lot of hooks. So React has, and these hooks are more like, you can call them function as well, but they are functions that take in callback functions. And in that callback functions, you can write whatever code you want to write there, just like the way you write normal JavaScript. But React calls them hook. That's for functional. If you're using the functional components, which is what we are doing. But if you're writing your React using class components, they are called lifecycle methods. If you go to Dada to do item, if you're writing your code using this class to do item, extends, this and this, they are called lifecycle methods. And you can write those lifecycle methods using, just like we write normal methods in OOP in Python. You can write your lifecycle. So there are a lot of them actually. Don't forget to import this component back if you want to write your component as a class. So one of them is component did mount. So what this one does is it's going to tell you that, okay, your component has mounted. Component has mounted. Another one is, in fact, as you start typing, you start seeing the suggestions. There's one here, component did update. So this one is very useful if you want to check if based on the props you passed to a particular component, if the value of the prop in that component has updated, as if it has received a new value. Another one is component will unmount. Another one is should components update. So we have these lifecycle methods. So I think it's pretty descriptive here because you can get to know what each of these methods do, right? They are called lifecycle methods, but it's not really descriptive in the sense of class components because all these three methods, they are kind of combined together into a single function, which is the use effect hook. That's what we call hooks in functional components. So all these components will mount, components did update. Most of it, you can use this use effect hook to access those functionality of those lifecycle methods. So there are a lot of hooks in React, and one of them is the use effects. In fact, you mostly use the use effects. You're also going to use the use states. Then sometimes you can also use the use callback. You use the use ref a lot, not really a lot, but depending on what you're doing. Because if you're building applications like using Mapbox libraries and the likes, you usually use this use ref to define your to make a reference to your map container, so that you can then be able to use the map API like map.set, zoom level, map.zoom to, and a lot of. So they're using Mapbox GL library, MapLibra, TechGL, and web map libraries. You mostly use useref. So this useref is we can't really go through all this, but let's just go through the ones that I think that will be useful to you and that you're going to use, that you will come across often. We also have use memo. I think I should just write all of them here, then we go through the ones we can go through. Callback. So in case you're not sure of them, they're also on the React documentation. And also, I think if you start typing use, you should also see some suggestions. You can see use callback. You also use context for React context API. So we're also going to talk about this. We have use reducer as well for Redux. So let me just type them here. Then if I can't go through some of them, I'll just talk about it. So their functionality. So these guys right here, they are hooks that provides some more functionality to your component, even beyond lifecycle methods. So this use effects kind of handles most of the lifecycle methods, because with use effects, you can get to know when your component is mounted on the screen. That is when it's visible on the interface or the browser of your user. You can get to know when a value or props that is passed to your component is updated, right? So you can do this with use effects. For use states, you can store data in a component, and the data will only reside in that component. You can do that with use state. That's what it's mostly used for. Then for use ref, you can use it to reference a particular HTML element. For example, if I want to reference this input box, what I'll just do is ref equals to input box reference, or reference, yeah. in case you want to type it in full, then I'll just create a function here, which is, or a variable here, which is say const inbuilt box reference equals to use ref. So I'll just initialize this use ref because they are all functions like I mentioned. So you initialize this use ref, and then you say input box reference equals to this use ref. Then you pass in this input box reference as a reference. So all HTML elements has this ref. I think all has this ref. So you can just pass it that, okay, ref equals to input box reference. So if I console.log input box reference and I go to the console, you can see it's going to show you an object of that input box reference. Maybe I should just remove all this so that it won't confuse. We have a lot on the console. See a typo somewhere. So if you expand it, you see we have search box. In fact, if you over on it, it's even over here on the search box. Can you see? So now with this, you have a reference to the search box. So let's say, for example, because most of these web map libraries, you need to provide a map container. You need to provide. You might want to do a lot of stuff, like maybe when someone starts searching on this, you want to access your geocoding. Maybe use Mapbox geocoding API, for example, that when someone is typing an address, you want to be automatically fetching the response and stuff. So it's, you already have access to this search box, you already have a reference to it, so you can do a lot with this. And what you just need to do is to grab the .current value, and then you have access to the full search box, which is more or less like the way you have access to HTML elements. If it has inner text, you can get it. If it has inner HTML, you can get it. But this is just a normal HTML element. But the ref is giving you access to the HTML elements. So that's that about ref. Then we have the use memo. So this memo is for memoization. It's useful for optimizing function speed or callback of variables or values. So more like I can say for optimizing our components, because sometimes you might want to do some complex queries or you might have some complex functions. So you can memorize them to kind of optimize your components. So then we have use reducer. So you use this to interface mostly with is a hook. It's more like similar to the use state hook anyways, but it allows you to perform some custom logic, So with the use state, okay, I said the use state is for storing data. So the use state is for storing single data. Let me show you how the use state works. So now as we're in this search box, we can define a use state like this. Const, then you open a square bracket, equals to use state. Again, it's a function, so you have to initialize it. So this use state, in this square bracket, you can provide two things. The initial value, and then a function to set or update the value. That's in this square bracket. So let's say this is search box. We can't really, is there anything we can store in this search box? So let's say this search box has its own data, like let's just say, let's use okay, so I can't think of anything that we might want to search or store on the search box, because the search box doesn't really store data, so it doesn't make sense to do that. So let's think of something else to do. But let's just do a demo. So let's assume we have data to be stored on this search box. Let's say this input has a default value, and then we can say default value. So this is a variable I've not defined, which I'll define shortly. So this default value can be coming from this use state, which can be the initial value. Then the next would be a function that you can use to update this default value. So most times people you call such function set, then they repeat whatever they define here. So in this case, set default value. And after you do that, you provide an initial value for your use state, which can take in a list, a JavaScript object, a null, or an empty string, or even one, or a real string. So it can take in anything. So into my import our use states. It's also coming from React. So if I go back to this, my to-do list, because we have set the value, you see, the value will appear here inside the search box, real string. If I change the value here is here to real string updated. If I go back to this to-do search box, you will see it's going to show you the updated value. So this is like the initial state. This is what we show when you load your components, when your component has been, like when it's rendered on the screen, that is when it appears. And it's usually fast actually, like if I reload now, you see, it looks like nothing even changed, because immediately you can see your components, and you can see that immediately you can see the content that we have in that use state. So state is used to keep data about a particular component within that particular component. What I have here is not tampering with what is in to-do item. You understand? So it's internal to this component, this data. And then because we have set default value, we can use this to update the state from this real string updated to anything we want to do. So say for example, this is search box. Most of these inputs used to have most of these input elements used to have unchanged functions. So let's say you want to activate an unchanged event. You type that event, and then you can give it a function that's a callback. So you can say, as this thing is changing, that's unchanged, I want you to do something. So you can give it a function, say do something. Then of course you have to define that function right here, and you can define it using an arrow function that's const do something equals to an arrow function. And then let's say what this function does is just console.log default value, that's the previous initial state, and then also update the state, that's set default value with something. So what can we use to update the state? We can update the state with the value that the person is typing right here. And how can we get the value? This unchanged event used to have some event handlers, some event parameters, which we can pass to this do something function. And how we can do that is by grabbing that event and then passing it to do something. Okay, grab the event, because ideally this onChange must always receive a function. That's by default. So what I'm trying to do is it must always receive a callback. So what I'm trying to do is to kind of create a callback here. What the callback is doing is just for us to grab the event that is coming from this onChange handler and then passing that event to our own function that we are trying to create up here as a parameter. So here now we can grab events and then let's just log events before we even do anything else. Console.log event and see if it works. So let me comment this two out. So because it's onChange events, that means as I'm typing, you can see it's going to be showing the event propagation as I'm typing. So okay, let me remove this ref. I think we don't need that anymore because there seems to be a lot of variables, a lot of functions, so it can be confusing. So again, let me now log our default value and then let me update the default value with event.target.value. So what is just happening here is I'm getting that event, then I'm getting the target object, and then I want to get the value. So the value will be whatever you type here, which in this case is real string updated. But you start typing something else, it would change. So let me just do something here and call it old state, and then let's also log and let's also update this state with what you just typed. Okay, so let me check if everything is okay. So this is a search bar, so let's change this to text, because if you give this let me see, you can see I'm able to like cancel and type something. If I make it a type of search bar has a different functionality in HTML, so it will be difficult for me to do some of those stuffs. So it's just better I use the right type. So in this case, I'm just trying to demonstrate how some of these things work. But I think the type of search is also working fine, so maybe we can also leave it. But just always ensure you're using the right type. You know, this input element has different types. Some have type of search, type of text, type of date, type of range, and type of email. There's also a type for email. So whatever you want to use it for, just ensure you're using the right one. So let me reload and see if there will be a default state. Of course, there will be a default state, and it's going to take what we have because we are giving it a value, and what we are giving it is the default value, and default value is what we have here in our use state as real string updated. So that will be the default value. So if I cancel any of these points or any of these characters, you notice that the old state is getting locked. And what do you see in the old state? The old state is going to show you what was there before you carried out the onChange event. That in this case, before I cancelled a particular, I'm actually using backspace. So before I press the back state, it's going to show you what was in this field. Like currently now, I have UPD, and what was there before was UPDA. So that means if I cancel this D, it's going to tell me that what was there before was the UPD, and now I have UP in my input, and this is what's happening. you are logging the old state, and after you log the old state, you are setting that old state with the recent change event, with the recent thing you just did in this input box, that's in this search box. And what did I just do? I closed, or I pressed the backspace on my computer to remove this P, and immediately it's removed. This would set the default value, which was previously real string, updated to what is now in this input box. And that's how state works. You can not only provide a default value, you can also update it using this function that is given to you by this useState function. So this useState has two. The first is the value itself that you want to update, and then the second is a function, more like a callback, and a asynchronous callback function that you can dispatch, that you can call to update this default value. Let's try and change this from input event from input box to maybe a button. Let me change this from search to button and see if this will change to button. Okay, let's change to button. So you can remove this and just make it, since it's button, then we can change this from unchanged to onclick event. And then let's real string. It should not have any content. Yeah, it should not have anything. So let's just give it something like buttons don't have placeholder, so let me just use a normal button instead of input. So let me remove this type, and then so I can be able to type here, click me, for example. So let's see. Yeah, click me. So when you click on this on click event, you can still see this do something is still running. That's why if I click on it, it's still showing me old states. You can see it's still showing me old states. So I don't want this to show us old states. Let's just create another HTML component after this button. Let's create maybe a paragraph that just display an increment of a number of a variable. I've not created this variable, but I'll do it shortly. And then we can do another paragraph that shows a decrement of a number. Okay, since we have just a single button, then we can just only have one. Let's just say increment. So number increments. Let's create a variable which we want to store in our state. So to create a state, again, const square bracket equals to useState, and you set a default. Since we want to work with number, the default can be 0. Then you assign this default value to this variable. Number increment is 0. Then we have access to a function which you can also use to set the number increment. So that's the first state, the first step. So don't always forget to put this inside a div, because you can only return a component. You can't return two components. If you notice, I want to return a button and a paragraph. It won't work. It will fail. You have to put everything in a single container. You can see the error has gone. Another way you can go about it is, if you don't want to use a container, you can use a fragment. So there's something we call React fragment. So this fragment is also more like you creating a container. But the idea of this is that this container would not create a new node on the document object model. So you can just say fragment, and to still work. But there's also a shortcut for this fragment, and that's just you doing this, using this bare tags without anything. Still the same thing as using fragment. So I use this a lot without, I don't need to type fragment. I use this a lot. It's not much you use divs, because divs, when you use divs everywhere, it might tamper with your design and structure of your grids and CSS, Flexbox. So just use a fragment so that you don't need to create a new node again. So now there's no error. So now when the button is clicked, we are telling it to do something. So we don't even need the event here, because the reason why we needed the event earlier was because we want to get the value that the person is typing. And it was a search box then. So we can just call the function directly here. Just pass in the function and the callback. So now in the callback, you can just do what? Increment this value by 1. So, and how do we do that? We set number increment, as we call this function here. And then what do? We add 1 to this initial value, which is 0. So we say when you click on this button, do something, and in this do something function, add 1 to the number increment. And how do you add 1? You can add 1 using number increment plus, okay, let me just do +1 so that there won't be confusion. So just do number increment +1. So we can comment this out since we are not using it again. So now if I go back to this design, we have our initial state increment, which is this right here, increment. Let me make it capital I. And then in front of it, we are using JSX here, so we can be able to access JavaScript variables, which number increment is. And the variable number increment is coming from our useState. And the default value we gave it is 0. That's why we have 0 here. If I give the default value to be 1 and I save, this will change to 1. If you notice, React is very smart. So the React DOM is not re-rendering this page. You can see the page is not reloading. This is just the only part that changes. And that's why the idea of the virtual DOM, which is a React component, is very good. It doesn't re-render unnecessarily. It only re-renders what changes in your application or in your component. So if I change this to 2, for example, you can see this page is not reloading. Only this part changes. Okay, so now let's click on this button and see if it's going to do something for us. You can see, I clicked on this button, what happened? The number has been increased from 2 to 3. Click on it again. It has been increased from 3 to 4. Keep clicking on it to keep increasing. And what's happening? What's happening is that this component, that's this component, is storing the state. You might have been wondering, how does this component know that the previous number was 9 for you to now add 1 to it to make it 10? Now the current number is 10. If I click on this, it's now 11. Why is it not starting from the beginning again? So what's happening here is this component is storing the states, and that's one of the functions of this useStates hook. Storing the states of what's happening in this component. Storing it in this component. So this can be anything. This is just a simple example. This can be a very long JavaScript object. This can be anything. So that's just the concept of useState. useState is used to store information about anything within a state or within a component, and you can have many of it. You can have as many useState as you want. You can define it. But when you see that you are having a lot of useStates, say you want to store increment, you want to store decrement, you want to store addition, you want to store subtraction, you want to store this and that, you want to store profile picture, you want to store the current map view, you want to store the location of the user, you want to store this all within a single component. Then you can start thinking of using a use reducer. So use reducer makes it easy for you to define initial states, define actions, and dispatch actions, different actions to update any state you want to update in the object. So this also works anyways, or use reducer can be more efficient depending on your use case. I won't want to go into that because might be a bit complex. So you can still also use states to store multiple information about within a component. But when you realize that you're having up to 10 use states within a single component, or maybe 20, it might not affect the performance of your application anyways. But if you profile your application and you see that it's affecting it, you can start thinking of use reducer. So that concept of use reducer is it's a bit advanced because it's something similar to the Redux context, which I don't think we're going to be touching Redux. I'm not so sure, but just have it in mind. And Google is always your friend, you know. So that's about states. We're going to be using this a lot. That's why I took my time to explain it. Then another one is the use context. So this one is, the main purpose of this is to prevent what we call prop drilling. So prop drilling is what happens in React when, you know, React is a one-way data flow library, in the sense that you have a single source of truth. You know, I explained last week with the concept of storage tank. So you have a storage tank that is serving your house, and then you have different pipes that pass through different rooms to serve water to different parts of the building. So that's the same concept. You have a single state, and of course each of those components can also have their own states. That's why it's possible that in each of those rooms they can also have their own storage tanks to also store water. For example, in the kitchen, even though you have a storage tank externally that's, you know, serves water to the building, in the kitchen you can also have another, you know, drum or another bowl where you also keep some water. So that's like the same thing that is happening here. Just like what you just saw, we are storing this to an increment and stuff within this component. Another component can have its own state. This can also have its own state, so they are independent of each other. But the way we make them aware of what is happening in other components is by using props. If I want to, you know, for example, in this app.js, I have a to-do list where initially it was a list that I passed to this to-do list, and then I received it as a props from this to-do list, and then I'm passing it as a to-do to this to-do item, and then the to-do item I receive it as a props, and then I'm able to access the to-do elements. So now that we pass data, so it's the same concept in our house where they want to light up the city room, but the powerhouse where the main switch is maybe in the master bedroom or something. But the electrician is still going to pass the pipe. So, you know, it's going to pass through different rooms before it gets to the city room, right? So when you are building a very complex architecture or a complex application, you might be passing data around everywhere, passing data from here, passing data from there, pass data from search box to to-do item, from to-do list to to-do item, pass from the to-do item to the user profile item, so that you want to check if the user is authenticated, pass from the user profile to the user financial record. So depending on how complex your architecture is, you might be passing a lot of data around, and this can lead to can affect the performance of your application and can also lead to data leakage. So the idea of context is to prevent that. You understand? Is to prevent data data or prop drilling. So that what I just explained is called prop drilling. When you are passing data around anyway. In fact, you start passing data through a component that does not need the data set. For example, I need this to-do item to have the to-do, and it's coming from the to-do list. So imagine me passing this data through the search box before it gets to the to-do item. And assume that the search box does not really need the to-do item. It's just passing data. That's the function it's doing. So that's what we call props drilling. So instead of passing data through a component that does not need it, you can use the context API to prevent prop drilling. So you create a context, and then when you create a context, then any component, so the context can be a global, can host a global state. You can have multiple contexts as much as you want. And when you have a context, you can wrap it around a component that needs data about or that needs the data you want to pass around. So you don't need to pass data through other components. Just wrap the context around your component, and then you can be able to grab the data you need. So if time permits, we can actually look into context API. But I think for this to-do list application we are trying to build, there isn't really anything. Context is not really, I don't think it's really useful because we are building a very simple application. But I'm very sure as you start advancing, you start getting exposed to most of these hooks. Then the last component, or the last hook I want us to discuss, which you're also going to be using very well, is this use effect. So with the use effect, you can do a lot of things. In fact, a lot of people do use effect a lot because this use effect, you can add effects to your application. And what do I mean by effects? Effects can be updating your state, making API calls, and that's what we're going to be doing. We want to make API calls to the to-do list API that Coffee has helped us with. So it is the search box. So let me return this back to being a search box. Let me remove this ref. This ref you're going to use it a lot when you're working with GIS web map libraries. I can guarantee you that you're going to use it a lot. So let's see. This is the button. Oh no, I should change to impute. Impute. So impute should not have anything here. It should just be search to do. Yeah, I can type now. Okay, so impute. Okay, I can also remove this. So there's no states needed here for now. If we need the state, we can always come back to it. So I think what we want to do is to display to do items from that API. So we need to go to our to-do list component to fetch the to-do from the backend, and then we can loop through the to-do and then pass it to the to-do item to display. So let's do that. So use effect is used to add effects to your components, and one of the effects that you can add to your components is making API calls. So this use effects is, so I use arrow function a lot. In fact, you will use it a lot, and this arrow function looks like const function name equals to brackets, and that's all. This is an arrow function. So this can have a bracket and it might not. If you want to receive multiple arguments, like argument 1, argument 2, of course you need to put brackets here. Or if it's just a single argument, you can even remove this bracket and just provide the arguments. Then this also depends if you have something you want to return. If you're returning a single thing, say return 2, you can also remove this curly bracket and use this. Okay, I'll show us that shortly. So you can do this within components, not outside here. So but even though it should be able to work actually, because by default, so the thing is, if you use curly brackets like this, you have to say return something, return x or 2. But if you use this bracket, you don't need to say return, just put whatever you want to return. This bracket already signifies return. Say for example, I want to log something. I don't need to say return console.log or something. So this is just syntactic sugar, just JavaScript. It's not React. This is a normal JavaScript stuff. So that's by the way. So that's what's happening here in this use effect. I'm passing in a callback which I've not defined. And then another thing this use effect receives is what we call dependency list. The first thing I'm passing is a callback. This is a callback function that accepts something and then return something. Within here you can do return null or anything. Of course, we are still going to make API call here. We're going to come back to this. I want us to know that after that callback function, you can pass a dependency array here. So think of this as set timeout. I think many of us must have used set timeout in JavaScript. This set timeout also receives a callback, but the difference is just that instead of dependency array, what it receives is the milliseconds that you want the timeout function. That's this function here to be delayed for. So it's more like a similar concept actually. That's what's happening here. So it receives this callback, and then you have a dependency array. So this dependency array, if you leave it like this, whatever you have in your callback, whatever you have here, this function will run only once, and it will only run after this component has appeared on your screen or after this component has been rendered. And this is like equivalent to the component did update that I showed us earlier in the class component lifecycle methods. Yeah, this one. Component did mount. When the component is mounted on the screen, that is when this to-do list component is on the screen. This will run immediately. Whatever function you call here, you have here either is to make an API call to an external API or something. It's going to run immediately. So far you have a dependency array here and it's empty. And even if it's not empty, this use effect runs immediately your component has been updated or appeared on the screen or has been mounted or has been rendered on the screen. So that's the equivalent of this component did mount. Then another lifecycle method I talked about is component did update. So that one happens when your component has been updated with a value that it receives from a prop or even from its own state. So let's say, for example, we have an internal state within this application that changes in value. If you want to do something immediately, the value change. For example, what we did earlier was the increment. If, for example, after we've clicked a button to increment the numbers, we want to do it such a way that after it has incremented, make an API call to an endpoint to do something or reload the page or open the nav bar, or do anything basically. What you just do in this use effect is pass in that value that you are expecting to be updated or be changed. Say for example, props dot to do. So let's assume that you want this use effect to run again when this to do item has changed. Just pass it here. So what will happen is immediately your component is rendered on the screen, it will first run this use effect. Whatever you have here initially will be run. Then after this has updated, it will rerun again. When it detects that this has updated its value again, it will rerun. So this function is not dependent on this value, and you can have multiple values here. Not only to do, you can say, okay, you want it to also rerun when something has changed, right? So you can pass multiple value here, value 1, value 2, and this callback function will always run whenever it detects an update in any of the values that you have provided in this dependency array, right? Okay, so let's interface with our API. So we're going to be using the fetch API, which is inbuilt in JavaScript, and this is how we do that. Const response. Okay, let's just say fetch. So where's that URL? I'm assuming we already know how to use fetch because I believe most of us have a JavaScript knowledge. So this is how fetch works. Fetch this API, then dot then. So I think here we have response, and then we can return response.json. Let's see if this. Let me just confirm if it's going to work. So something that might want to happen might be the. Let me see that I want also log the rest. So which component is this to-do list? So let me remove this. I want this to run only once for now. It's not a must to return anything anyways. Let me be sure this is working the way I expected it to work. So nothing is showing in the console. Let's go to our network tab and see if any API call is happening. Okay, no API call is happening, and nothing is in the console. So this is use effect. This is our to-do list. Is our to-do list even rendered at all? No, I think we commented it out. So let's uncomment it so it can render on the map. I expect an error to come. Of course, we're going to throw an error because in the to-do list, we are trying to map a to-do list from the props. There's no to-do list coming from this props. Right here is empty. So let's just create a state using the use state. So we can state to do, set to do equals to use state, and let's make it an empty array. So we don't have props, we're not passing any data from the top level app again. We are the one we want to fetch it within this. Of course, import your use state from React. So we just say to do.map. So it's getting this default. Of course, it's empty list now. And what we want to do is inside this use effect, we want to fetch the API for the to-dos. Then when we are done fetching the APIs from the to-dos, then we use this set to do to update this empty list with the response we get from the API. So this should take away the previous warning. Then the next one we have now is that the API has blocked our API call because of cost policy. So I actually anticipated this, but what can we do? There's nothing we can do actually, unfortunately. But the solution to this is Coffee. In your Django REST framework application, install what we call Django CORS header. It's a library. So when you install the library in your Django REST framework application, then you include this in your settings. Of course, follow all the steps here. Then include this cost allowed origins in your settings. So then you specify this localhost. In our case, it's port 3000. So you specify it HTTP localhost port 3000. So when you do that, that error will leave.
Okay, I can try to do that now.
Okay, so if you can go do that before we during the lecture, to be very great. So while you do that, there's this public fake REST API for testing stuff. So we can also get data from here to also test how the API works. So there are different endpoints. Let's just try for, oh, there's even to-dos. So let's try this endpoint. So this is our endpoint for to-dos. So let's replace it here. And let's see if it's going to work. I hope it works. So do app. Let me inspect and see if it's logging in the console. Oh, awesome. So our response is login. Good. So okay, it's true. Status is 200. I think we mentioned this during the React class that Django REST framework class that 200 means okay, so it's working. So the fetch API works. So that's just for us to test if this works. So now that we have our response and we are sure that it's working, so the next thing now is to grab the data from the response. That'll be .then data. Then let's do console.log data. So perfect. You can see we have the data here, 200 data. That's a lot of to-do lists that we don't want to. So anyways, so now that we have the data, let's now update this with the data. Let's set to do with the data set. So to do that, you can just do set to do with the data to update the array with the data set. So immediately you notice this is populated with 200 200. Well, depending on the response, but seeing that this is 200, it's going to be populated with 200 to-do lists. That's a lot. So what can we do? We can let's check the shape of the response. It's an array of 200 items. Completed false, completed true. Well, since it's an array, we can filter it and say we want only the ones that as completed equals to true. So we can do that from array from this our to-do list, this array. So before we map it, that's before we look through it, we can also filter it here. So this filter receives a function where you can get the value you want to filter with. So you can see you want when value dot is completed equals to true. So this should be reduced from 200 to something smaller than 200. I wouldn't know, or we can let's check the shape of this, how the data is organized, what is contained in the object. So we have completed first, we have ID1, we have title, and we have user ID. And before, we are just passing the to-do task. Let's just pass the to-do.id. Okay, this ID here. So to-do task. So this one is title. They call their own title task as title. So let's change this from to-do task to to-do title, and then let's save. So it has been updated with the actual content they have here. So let's also pass the status of the to-do as another props. So we can say to-do dot completed. So we have another props here. So we go to this to-do item component. What we are currently displaying is the to-do, which is what we have here. So we can also create another new HTML component, and then say we also want to display the props.status, and then this should show us the status of the completed, status of the to-do. Have I saved this? No, I haven't, I guess. Status to-do.completed. So status is a props of to-do item. So it's strange that this is not showing either true or false. So let's see what is happening. Can this be as a result of this filter? So let me remove this filter first and see if it's going to work or not. It's not working still. This is strange. Okay, let me just pass the old to-do object. I don't want to destructure it or grab any particular item. Let me just pass the old to-do. So I'm looping through this to-do by mapping it. I want to pass the old to-do object into this to-do item. So here I can be able to log it, console.log props.todo. I want to actually see what's in the contents of. Let me comment this out. Let me just cut it. I want to see what's in the contents of this to-do. It allows to print out. So this is what we have in the content of the to-do. Okay, so I want the first one to be the props.todo.title, props.todo.completed. I think completed true. So why is Boolean not showing? That's strange. Let me see if I can show the ID. Okay, the ID is showing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but the Boolean is not showing. Maybe because it's a Boolean, you know. So maybe what we can do here is create a new span and say status of this to-do is, then we open a JSX. So in this JSX, we can do a very simple expression, what we call ternary operator in JavaScript. So because we notice the booleans and it looks like it's not showing us a boolean on the screen, so we can say if props.todo.completed is true, show that the status is completed. Otherwise, show that it's not completed. Because it looks like this can only render string. It can't render boolean, right? So that's why those true and false are not showing. But what I just did is, let me just comment out this ID. I don't think we need the ID of the to do. Of course, we might want to need it, but for now, so that it doesn't confuse or tamper with this. So what I did was I created this HTML component, status, then I put a column there. Then I opened a JSX expression, and what I'm doing is if props dot to do, which is what we pass to this to do item from the to do list, and it's from this to do list that we filtered and then we mapped it. Okay, I think I even know why most of it are completed, because we have filtered as we only want when the status of the to do is completed. Let me see what will happen if I change this to not equals to true. You can see status is now not completed. So that's what this filtering is doing. And the reason for that is because we have about 200 to do, so I just want us to have a few. So you can do it like this is just like basic array manipulation in JavaScript. You can do filter, you can find and do this kind of stuff. So I'm just like it's called array chaining. I think they call it array chaining. I'm filtering first before I now loop through it. So while looping through it, I have access to the to-do item, and I'm like the to-do object, and I'm passing it to this to-do item. So it's that to-do object that I'm getting as props here, that for each of these objects, as you can see, if the completed value, which is this, is true, you can actually write this like say is equals to true, return this, show that the status is completed. Otherwise, as semicolon, colon, show that it is not completed. So this is what we call ternary operator in JavaScript. You can use ternary operator here, but you can't use if else within this JSX. So this is very simple stuff that you are going to use a lot right here, because with this you can only use it within HTML components. You can even use this to determine what to render on the screen. So for example, you don't want to render a to-do item if the props, now we are just rendering status. Like we are using the ternary operator to know if it's completed or not. Yeah, you can say you don't want to, of course, before you can write any JavaScript expression, you have to open up this curly bracket and then put wherever you want to do within it. And you have access to those JavaScript expressions. So if I say what I'm writing here, instead of saying if props does to this completed within here, you can just say only show. So if props dots, so this is like a tautology, it's just like it's redundant, because by default, if this is true, that's when this will happen. So you don't need to actually say is equals to is equals to is equals to true again. So let's say you want to display a to-do element. If it is true, you can just say if props dot to do dot completed is true, post this question mark, display the to-do list. So in this case, is a string that is coming after this question mark. But in this case now it's a component, not really a component, but a div. But it can also be a component. And after what you want to return, if this is true, then you put column, then you specify what you want to return when it's not true. And it's going to work. So when it's not true, you can decide to return another div. and what you want to put here can be not true. I don't know. It can be anything. So this is one of the ways you can write. But wait, is it that none of this, all of this, like none of this fulfills this criteria? Because it's not returning anything. Is a filtering happening here? Okay, filtering is happening here. Let's see what will happen if we change that to true. Nothing is happening still. Okay. Props.todo was completed. If it's true, return this component. If it's not true, don't return anything. Let me refresh. So I was already surprised, like what's happening. So now you can see everything here is completed because we are only returning this div if it's completed. If it's not, you see not true. So let me just remove this filter so we can see how they both look. Let me just cut this so that we can see the mix of the two. You can see the mix of the two now. You can see not true, not true, not true. Let me go to the top. Not true, not true, not true. If it's true, you see this component. You know, this one is the one we designed, this div right here in the to-do item. It has the title, the status, and this. You can see. Why if it's not true, you just see it's ordinary div with not true. You can see. So you can use that kind of conditional to determine what to display on the screen or not. That's why sometimes if you go to a particular platform, you see the button that used to say login when you've not logged in on the app, but just suddenly change to logout after you log in, or dashboard after you log in. What's happening? Let me even show you an example in Splashnote, because this is one I did myself. When you go to Splashnote, for example, this button is a component. It's a very dynamic component, like very dynamic. Now I'm not logged in on this platform yet, right? I'm not logged in on this platform. If I click on login, it's going to go to the login page. And if I log into this application, I'm not sure this is my details. Okay, it is. So if I log into this application, that button has changed to showcase. If I go to the home page, the button has changed to showcase. So when I click on showcase, I would select what I want to showcase. If I have a project, I want to upload the certification, the skills or links. That one. Another one is, let me just see if I can go to my dashboard, for example. And then let me see, can I share my portfolio? Okay, not this public profile. So there are a lot of dynamic components here. Another one is this like icon. And this, if I let's even use this. Now I'm logged in. If I click on this like button, I can like a project. I can like a lot of projects. Right? I can like a lot of projects. Now let me log out. If I log out from this platform and then I see I want to like a project, you see what will happen. Instead of me to like the project easily, of course, this is at the recent life I just did. Immediately I click on it, what you will see will be a modal that will tell me to join the community and say I should log in or register to give feedback on this project. You get the idea? So those are like conditionals. So what I'm doing at the back end or in the React app is, if the user is authenticated, let the person like the project. Like when you're authenticated, do something. Otherwise, do something else. So that's just the same concept of this ternary operator. If this to do is completed, question mark, return this div. Otherwise, return not true. That's why we have not true when it fulfills the not true criteria, and then this div when it fulfills this div criteria. So that's by the way. So let's just return. Let me remove this and then just return the to-do items, although there are 200 of them, that's a lot. So let's return back this filter to only filter the ones that are completed. So now here we have all our to-dos completed. So that's I don't know if the API of if your API is back.
Yes, I do see it, but I don't know if it solved the problem, but maybe.
Oh, thank you. Let me go back to where we made the API call and then change the URL to your API. So it might not work because the way the response of this one is arranged, in this one they have user ID and title. While yours we have ID, task, create, date, and completed. So I'm going to do some few changes. But let's even check the console first to be sure that it's working. So I think it's working. It's not showing that cause error again. So all we just need to do is to change what we are filtering. So this is what we are filtering. You can only filter an array. So that means you're going to be grabbing this results object. So instead of setting the to-do with just the data, we set it with data.results. Then what's the structure? So in each result, we have ID, task, create. Okay, you also have completed. It's also the same thing as this. So that means we are not going to be changing much. So we're going to change this from title to task. Here's this task. So we go to do item. Change this from title to task. And let's see if it's going to work. Let me reload this. Okay, you don't have ID. Okay, yours is ID2.
ID2, yes.
Okay, so where is that to-do list? Make this ID2. So let's see. Is it that it's only, do you have anything called string as a to-do? Oh, you do. Okay, we are filtering it. Wow, it's working out. Thank you. So showing this one, this first one, string. We filtered that it should only show us when this completed is true. That's why it's showing us just one. So why did we use the filter? So this is the filter that we are using. But we only want to see when the completed is true. But since your to-do is very small, just 5 of them, so we can display everything. So we can just remove this filter. That one was too much. That was why I filtered it. So now we have all our to-do list. Make a map for us and maths. So these are the to-do list from the back end. So now let's try and add a to-do to the back end. So let me just put a very ugly input button below the search bar. And then so that's, you can see this API call only happens once, and it happens when your component is rendered on the screen, which is actually not noticeable. It's usually fast, so you won't even know when it happened. So React is very smart. So this is fetch that is happening. Now to create to do, we are going to be using fetch as well, but another HTTP method. So, but before we create a to do, maybe that's like the last thing we should be working on next week because our time is fast spent. Let's make sure that this search bar is functional. At least when you are searching a to do based on a task, it should show you, like it should show on the top the to-dos that fit the criteria. You understand? So if we can be able to do that, then maybe on our next class we then create another input box where you can type in it to do, and then as you press enter, for example, or a button that you maybe add button, is going to send a post request to your backend and then update the to do. Then maybe we should also do a delete. So maybe you can try delete as well. But so those ones are actually easy. If you can be able to do posts, do a post request, you can also be able to do a delete request and then edit request as well. But let's try and see if we can get this search to work. So where's the search bar? So input type search. So what we need is onChange. We need onChange handler, and then let's say undo change. Let's give it a function. let's get the event from this and pass it to that function. And of course, we have to define the function const handle change, grab the event equals to arrow function, remember. Then it should be equals to here, handle change equals to. And let's store a state here to store what the user is currently searching. So you can say user input or user search input, set user input. Then you can say use state, and then the default is null. That's the default thing the user is searching. Then we want the value in this search box to be what the user is typing. So the placeholder will be what the user will see before they start typing, which is search to do. Once you start typing, it's going to be this value. So as you start typing, when this change event is happening, I want to set this user input with what you are typing. That's events.target.value. That's what you're typing. That's why when I start typing, I see setting what I'm typing. So now what I want to do is I want to pass this user input to this to-do list component, so that instead of displaying all these 5 items, I should start typing to get that value and then display only the to-do list that fulfills, or that at least that has S in their name. Let me remove the status, or maybe you can leave it. So that means we need to bring in the. So one of the things in React is you need to decide where the state lives, where the state lives. So it can be very tricky. Now I'm putting a state in this search box, which ideally should be there because it's a user input. So I want to see if it's the right place to put it. Right? It's a very difficult decision to make sometimes, because where the state lives is determines what how your apps can interact with each other. So I think it's smart to put our state here, because if you notice, you can easily access this search box and then just pass whatever you want to pass as values. And you can also share the same value with this to-do list. You can also do it such that your to-do list is in this search box component, because this is very important. You need to know where to put your state. It's a decision you need to make. It's a decision you need to make, because of course I've changed the location, so it has taken over the styling of the previous of this component, but we can override the styling. So if I put this to-do list here, that means instead of me making the API call in this to-do, I can make it in the search box. Okay, we can also make it in the to-do. Or we're just going to pass to this to-do list as props. Now we're not using any props because we're making the API call inside this place. So let's collect props from search box. So that will be user input is the props we want to pass. I want it to be this same user input that the person is typing. So when we get this user input as props, so we can now filter the result of this API call, which is in this array, with the user input. So that's one way to go about it. So that's to do dot filter. Then we get value. So we want to filter when the value dot, in this case, what's the dot task dot includes, it's a string, props dot user impute. Let me not map it. So I'll repeat this, but let me see if it's going to work first. Let me cancel this. Make a map. It works actually. This okay, I've seen an issue here. The issue is it's case sensitive. So what we can do here is ensure they are all in lowercase. That's props.userinput dot to lowercase. So this is an inbuilt JavaScript method that you can use to convert all alphabetic characters to lowercase. And then we can also say the value dot task dot includes. So let's convert this value to lowercase as well. So that's value dot tasks dot to lowercase. Then we can check if it includes this props dot user input. So let me see if I type make in lowercase ahead. So typing make in lowercase now shows the to do that fills that search stuff. Now I want to read a book. If I search read a book, it's going to bring it to the top. So before I revisit what I just did, let me firstly remove this ugly styling. Where's the styling coming from? Let me give it its own, okay, to-do list. Is there a class name here? Search box. Search box. Where is search box? Where is this styling coming from? App.js is where we import. Okay, background red. So this is an inline style, that's why. Let me remove this style. It's so ugly. So I want us to get the functionality right. We can let's style the way we want. Okay, so this is better. So what I did was that, again, what makes a great React developer is when you're able to know where to keep your state, that is your data, and when you know how to pass data around, how to pass props around. So what I did was we used use effects to fetch all our to do from the backend. Immediately our component is rendered. So if I reload this page now, immediately this page is rendered. You can see all our to do are fetched from the backend. If you let me inspect this so I can show you the network tab. Then let me reload. So it's very fast. You can't know, but you can see it here. This is the API call to the backend, and thankfully, so the backend is very fast. So that's why you have to have a very fast backend. It's very fast, so it responds very fast. You can go to preview to see the results. Like the backend is very fast. You can see 289 milliseconds. That's very, very fast. So great job, Coffee. That's a very fast API. So immediately it fetches it after this component is rendered. You know, initially it's empty state. It's empty state. And how do you know? Let me comment this out. Then let me reload. You can see you can't see anything to do because it's empty state. And that's the function of use state. But immediately the components updated, like immediately it's rendered on the screen. It's going to go to the backend, fetch the to do, then updates this empty state using this set to do, which is a function that is returned from use state. Then update it with the data.result. And how do I know about this result? Because I've already checked the to do API and I can see that there's a result that contains the array of all the data sets. So that's what I did here. Then again, like if you can recall, I mentioned that if you make this an empty square bracket, it's going to call the function only once. You get? So that's what happened there. And after the to-do has been updated, then we mapped through it to do dot map. This was not here before. We mapped through it, then we passed each of these to do to this to do item. And what we're just doing this to do item is to display the task and the status. Then we have some buttons here that we are not using yet that we're still going to use. And then we did a very simple internal operator here that, okay, if this to do dot, if this props dot to do is completed, make it completed. If it's not, make it not completed. This is why I'm using props, is because I want us to get used to props, because there are also faster ways to do stuff. There's what we call destructuring in JavaScript, for example. Because if you notice, I'm using props everywhere. So you can actually destructure this and just grab what you want to grab from the props. In this case, to do. Because sometimes the props can have a lot of data. What you need is just the to do. So instead of doing props.this, props.that, just destructure it into using this object and then grab what you want to grab. And it's going to work, of course. So then after that, we have this. Then we wanted to build a functionality where you can be able to search a to-do list. So this is how it was before. This search is not working. Right? Nothing is happening. So we had to, so what I did was I just thought of it like, okay, before we have in the app.js, we have our to-do below the search box. And I was like, what if I put the to-do list in the same component as this search box, because I'm trying to avoid having to pass data around too much. You understand? So in this search box now, the to-do was here before. I brought it out here and then I took it in this search box where we have the inputs, which is this, and then the to-do list below it. You understand? So what I'm doing with this input is the search box. I have like an unchanged event here that updates the state with what the user is typing. So the state is empty by default. And what this one do is just update the state by whatever the user is typing. That's the fend.target.value. And the type is a search. And then the value is user input, that wherever you're typing. And then because I need the user input to know how to filter this to-do list such that when you're searching for a to-do, instead of still seeing all the to-dos, it will only show you the ones that, or the one that fulfills the criteria you're searching for. Then I also pass the same user input, that's what the user is typing, into this to-do list component. So now that becomes a props in this to-do list component. So what I just did was that, before I already showed us how filtering works. You can filter an array based on a particular value. So what I did was that before I even began to map this array to this place like this, I want to filter it based on the value the user inputs, which I've received from props, right? So I'm saying that this to-do list, all these to-do items here, I want to filter it such that the to-do.task, which is this task is a string. All these tasks are string. Then I converted them to lowercase so that they can all be uniform. Because a to-do can be written, can have uppercase and lowercase. So after I converted them to lowercase, then I now check that if all these in lowercase includes, so this is like a JavaScript method for strings. You can check if a string includes any character. So I'm just checking that if this strings includes any of the user inputs that is coming from the props, as this props.user input, and of course I'm also converting that to lowercase. If it includes it, then it's going to return an array that fulfills this criteria, that is, so actually a filter returns an array. That's always the response. So a filter always return an array. Let me see if I can even show you how it's something. Let's see if we can just console log and see if we can show how it looks like. Let's see if it can be in the console so you can see the result of a filter. So you can see a filter returns an array, and this is an array of 5. For this case, the props, I've not typed anything. Let me type something. You can see the array has reduced to 4 because 4 items has S in their task. Maybe you should label this as task instead of just leaving it like that. Task. So you can look at this the task. So 4 items has S in their task. If I type another S, no item has SS in their task. If I type test, 2 items as test. This one, this is a test task, and then the second one, this is a test task. So, and you can see this is the response of the filter. Filter will only give you an array that fulfills the criteria you are trying to, you pass into it. So, it's now because it returns an array, you know. So basically what we are now trying to do is to now loop through the array it's returned. That's by using this map. And then after looping through it, return this component. And then we now pass to this component the to-do object, which is this object in this component. And then if you go to this to-do item, I destructure this to-do object. And that's why I now display task, the to-do.task, status, which we use, it's not operator here. And then these other buttons that we have not added their functionality yet. And then we have it here. So that's why it's dynamic. So there are different ways to go about it. You can decide to bring everything out and put it in this app.js, and decide to make your API call in this app.js, then bring back your to-do list here and pass the data from this app.js into your to-do list. So you can do it whatever way you want to do it. Everything is still boils down to passing of props, using of JavaScript methods like filter, like includes, like map, So it's still all JavaScript. So that's why the search bar is now dynamic. So if I search for something, it's going to, show the results. And then the beauty of this is that we are not making any API call to the backend again. We're physically playing with what we have stored in our state, and that's why it's very efficient. If the backend has a search functionality, for example, maybe there's where you can write q equals to something, and then it's going to show you results. Instead of doing filter here, yes, what I will just do here is add this props.user input as a dependency for this use effect, such that I will also include the exact query. Say query equals to user input, and of course I have to change this to this dynamic string. So as the user input is changing, that's this props the user input, since it's in the dependency array, I tell you that this function or anything you have here would run again. So that's what will happen. So as this user input changes, this fetch will call this API again using that query, that dynamic user input. So if you say, let me even show you how the results will look like. So let me type user input to be S. If you go to the network, you can see this query to your backend. I said SD. An API call will go to your backend with query equals to D, and then it's going to return the response of the query. Of course, its backend does not have a search functionality or any query functionality. That's why it's returning everything again, even though some of them does not fulfill the criteria. But assuming your backend has such setup, it's going to return only those that fulfill the criteria, right? And then what I'm now doing is updating this my state, which is my to-do list, with the results of those that fulfill the criteria. And immediately my state is updated using this set to do. Whatever I'll be looping through here will be the array that has been updated here. So if the backend return 4 item, and I update here with 4, whatever I'll be having here, or whatever the array of loop here will be an array of 4 items. That means this to-do list will only be displaying 4 items. So that's if you want it to be dynamic to communicate with your backend. But in our case, it's just a basic and simple string manipulation. No communication with the backend. Everything we are doing is on the front end, right here.
Hello, Emmanuel. It's fasting, so we'll have to.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I think we are able to achieve something. So we can just the next class will be about adding this edit functionality, and then another field where you can be able to add to do and communicate to the backend. So this is getting interesting. The React is very, very powerful, and I really hope we understand the concepts and practice after the class. Thank you so much.